A great example of the loss in welfare from government interventions is gas price ceilings. We have a market for gas with an equilibrium quantity and price. For example, in 1977, gasoline cost about 60 cents per gallon. So let's draw that as the equilibrium price. Then in 1978, the world got a little more unpredictable. The leader of Iran fled the country after protests and was replaced by a new leader. Iran has massive amounts of oil, which you need to make gasoline. With all the political turmoil, workers in the oil sector started to go on strike. Iran stopped selling oil to other countries. At this point in the course, you might be able to predict the result. Supply shifts up. There are fewer companies producing oil. As a result, prices go up. Indeed, the price of gas went from 60 cents per gallon in 1977 up to $1.20 per gallon just 3 years later. As you can imagine, folks here in the United States were not happy. Higher gas prices meant tighter budgets. Now imagine that you're living in 1979 and a politician starts running for office who promises to cap the price of gasoline. Would you vote for her? Sounds tempting, right? And in fact, the United States had price controls during the 1970s on gasoline. What does that look like on the graph? Suppose the price would have gone up to $1.20 per gallon, but the government imposed a price cap at the original level of 60 cents. At this price, with the new supply curve, firms are willing to produce less. Let's assume that before firms produced 30 million gallons per day, but with the political turmoil, they're now only willing to produce 15 million gallons per day. At the same time, the quantity demanded by consumers doesn't change. At 60 cents, they still demand 30 million gallons per day. There's a shortage. It doesn't matter that consumers want more gasoline than is being produced. It just isn't there. What happens to social welfare? Without the price ceiling, producer surplus would have been this triangle here. Consumer surplus would have been this triangle here. With the price ceiling, the government creates deadweight loss, this triangle here. This happens because there are plenty of consumers and producers who would have traded at the free market price of $1.20. But with the artificially lower price, lots of gasoline companies can't make a profit and don't supply the goods. So those transactions don't happen. Producer surplus drops. It's now this triangle. Consumer surplus rises. It's now this triangle, this rectangle, and this rectangle, which used to go to producers. Overall, consumers end up better off with the price ceiling, and producers are worse off. But if you add up consumer and producer surplus, it's lower than it would be without the price ceiling. That is, total social welfare is lower with this policy than without it. So why would we have this policy? Because maybe in society we don't think we should just add producer and consumer surplus. Maybe we care more about consumers than about oil companies. Indeed, consumers were better off with price caps than without. So maybe this episode shows that the government's willing to impose costs in society in order to increase consumer surplus. By the way, the same thing can happen in reverse, as we can see in the case of price floors in farming. The United States has a long history of farming. Farmers are a small group in the United States today, but they have a lot of political power. Between 2014 and 2016, demand for cheese dropped, and dairy farmers were left with roughly 655 million pounds in surplus cheese. Normally, after producing too much cheese in 2014, dairy farmers should cut back. Some may go out of business. Others may grow different things. Supply should adjust. But that's not what happened. Instead, in mid-2016, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced it would maintain a price floor on cheese. That is, the government announced that the price of cheese could not fall and would by regulation remain at the level it was in 2014. Let's graph the situation. Let's assume the drop in demand for cheese, the free market price would be $6 per pound and the free market quantity would be 950 million pounds. But the government's price floor means the price is stuck at $9 per pound. The shift in demand still happened, so quantity demanded is still lower. Demand doesn't come back magically just because the government sets a price floor. So the quantity demanded at the artificially high price is 700 million pounds, below the free market equilibrium quantity. The result is a huge surplus of cheese that no one wants. Now what happens to welfare? Without the price floor, producer surplus would be this. Consumer surplus is this triangle. Why? Because producer surplus is the entire area between the supply curve and the price, and consumer surplus is the entire area between the demand curve and the price. With the price floor, the government creates deadweight loss, this triangle here. This triangle disappears from social surplus because those units of cheese aren't being sold anymore. Many producers and consumers would have traded happily at $6 per pound, but they can't because of the government's price floor. What happens to consumer surplus? The price goes up, so the area between the demand curve and the price is going to drop. Consumers lose out by this rectangle. Where does it go? To the producers. Producers start with this triangle and this rectangle, then get this rectangle from consumers. This is a win for producers, a loss for consumers, and a loss for society overall, because of all the transactions that don't happen because of the price floor. Another way to describe this is that for political reasons, we've decided to transfer surplus from all Americans to a select group of Americans who farm. None of this is necessarily wrong. Any economist who tells you that our only goal is to maximize consumer surplus plus producer surplus isn't telling you the whole story. Maybe we do value some people more than others in some situations. But it's important to be clear about what we're doing. We're imposing a social cost because we're moving away from equilibrium quantity and price in the name of helping out some people over others. Is this a good idea or not? We'll discuss this later in the course when we talk not only about efficiency, but about fairness as well.